First of all, I'd like to say welcome to everybody from all our colonies, guests, people who have been here for the first time, people who have been here for many years. It's wonderful to see you all, and a wonderful weekend, wonderful subject that we have to cover this weekend. It's our first. Many years ago I wrote in a book that someday we should have a festival of the arts. This is the first one. Takes a while to get these things going. In the Rubaiyat Mahayam, there's a fascinating stanza which I don't, unfortunately, remember in such a way as to be able to quote it. This is the disadvantage of not preparing one's talks. I should have read it, memorized it, brought it to read or something. Nevertheless, it just occurred to me, and it's a perfect beginning. It is that stanza which says, "What lamp have these little ones to guide them through the dark?" I don't remember the words as I said. And the answer is a blind understanding. It seems like such a hopeless reply. And yet that's what we see, that man really is blind in his understanding as to where he's going and why he's going. And no wonder people go up and down and in and out and go in so many circles, because they don't really know what the direction of life is. Now, different people try to give us answers. Scientists have tried to give us answers, and they've produced things, but they haven't made different people. And it's rather a danger, actually, because they've shown us how to blow up the world, but they haven't given us the moral wisdom to understand that that's maybe not a good thing to do. And although nobody really wants it, nevertheless, people haven't learned how or even thought of getting rid of those emotions and that, in fact, blind understanding that could lead to a blow-up of sorts. I think it's headed that way. It certainly sounds it. If you listen to popular music, you get a real taste for the evolution of modern understanding. It's gone toward greater and greater violence. Look at the minuet back in Mozart's day. It was a very graceful dance. To be replaced by the waltz, which people in those days thought was positively indecent. Men and women touching each other, even at arm's length. But from then on, things really went from... something else happened. And if you listen to the music of, say, 1915, I remember a record that I used to love to listen to for the sheer joke of it. When those finale hoppers start hopping around. And there was a certain jitteriness which became jitterbug. It was tension, it was restlessness, it was sort of the ego not quite being in control, in fact, already getting quite out of control. And then came the era that I grew up in, the big band era with the ba-bum, ba-bum, and the ego getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then came music, which fortunately I didn't grow up with. It came later. In fact, I remember I was giving a lecture in Hollywood Church in about 1954 or 5, something like that. And I mentioned something about jitterbugging. Or no, it was boogie-woogie. And somebody afterwards said, in fact, her husband had played with one of the famous bands. And she said, "Don't you know it isn't boogie-woogie anymore?" I said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, well, what is it?" "Rock and roll." Well, I didn't know rock and roll, and I'm not at all sorry for the fact. But mind you, it had been popular for 5 years before I even heard of its existence. So that means I've been a little bit out of the swing of these things. I never have been in it. Nonetheless, you see that this trend has been toward, look at rock and roll, a very lower chalk or very heavy beat to it, much more than swing. Swing at least has a sort of ego, but rock and roll becomes an aggressive ego. And then it becomes more and more and more toward a beat that finally there's no direction for it to go except a big blow up. That's the direction of popular music. They even had the expression, even back in the 60s, things that are that blow your mind. Well, I think that's a very valid expression to express the popular consciousness. Where are we going? I think we're going towards some great explosion, but why? Blind understanding. Man doesn't know what he's doing and why he's doing it. And I think that it's very important that we get some sense of direction. Now, science is one. Business is one. Art is one. There are all kinds of little fields in which, if you get, there was an illustration that I was using last Sunday and completely forgot my point before I got to the end of it, so I'll give it to you now. But the Zeno's paradox, where he said that you can never cross a road. Why? Because you have to go half the distance before you can cross the road, right? Then of the remaining distance, you can only go half, and no matter how far you go, you've still got to split that in half. You'll never get to the other side. Well, it's very interesting how every little thing, if you get into it, it opens up a whole field of its own. And so man can become completely absorbed. Look at how people are. The emotions of the moment become everything to them. One lifetime becomes everything to them. You know how old you really are? I just had my 77th birthday. That's nothing. You're as old as I am, every one of you. How old are we? We don't have an age. We're ageless. We've been coming back and again and again and again, and each time we start out young and gurgling and puking and sort of having to learn it all over again. And yet, well, as Wordsworth said, we come trailing clouds of glory. I don't know about glory, lots of clouds. But the thing is that it is true that we have a basic knowledge inside us, and we get confused by outward influences, outward effects. We allow ourselves to become the effect of those causes. Now, the great teachers of mankind have come from time to time, and their disciples, because of the human tendency to stress the ego, have always tried to find those particular things that make their teacher unique. And yet if you look at the overall picture of what they are teaching, not one of them has ever taught that we should hate each other, that we should be unkind to each other, that we should rob from others, that we should kill to get ours. These are the morals of the marketplace, but they're not the morals of these great religious teachers. They've all basically taught the same things. And in fact, they've all come from the same place. In my book, which, just a moment, I've just about finished this book, God is for Everyone. This is the galley, and that means it's not completely perfect, it's not final, but just about. And I think that I've just about put the last lick to the last chapter in the last day. So, in this book, it speaks about the oneness of religion and how all the different great masters basically are all coming from the same place and teaching the same things. And I say in there, and this is one I've added in the last day, if a Muslim deeply loves Allah, he will be just as pleasing to Jesus Christ as any Christian. The great masters are not sectarian. They see truth as universal. And I can see all the teachers of these great religions, the followers of which are constantly bickering. I can see them sitting down and having tea up there in the astral world and having a great time. There isn't a difference, basically. Now, they have come to teach us certain rules of living that are natural rules. It's a rule of nature that you can't eat nails, and anybody who says, well, I've got free will and I'm going to eat nails. Okay, next lifetime. It isn't possible to create the laws of nature as man in his egotism often thinks he can, and we quickly learn that if you eat wrong, you suffer for it. If you do things that are wrong for your body, you suffer for it, yeah. But not everybody knows the same thing when it comes to spiritual and moral rules. And so some people think that there are moral rules that are just sort of up for grabs. Anything you like, anything that seems good to you, just take it, it's good. But bit by bit, it takes a little longer. You don't get a bellyache quickly from them, but over a few years you find yourself unhappy. The typical rule of modern American life, which thank God not all Americans follow, is I've got to get mine. Well, those who do that don't, in the end, look happy. I've always enjoyed, well, that's not quite the word, but I've always remembered what Howard Hughes said just a week before he died. Somebody asked him, are you happy? He said, nah, I can't say I'm happy. Well, how can you be happy if you become wealthy and then just hold it? Don't think of other people. Don't share with other people. There are rules. And you can make up your own rules, but will they be true? Will they not be true? You know, in writing music, I didn't have an education in composition. I took a course in it, but I never went to class, so you can't say that wasn't education. And I had a certain feeling for it. I know that on the day of the exam, the students were going into the exam room, and I was sitting on the steps of the building, hastily going through the book to see the bold-faced rules, hoping they would help me. And then he asked us for a bass line to write a melody. Well, as soon as I saw that bass line, this beautiful sort of haunting oriental melody came into my mind, and it fitted perfectly, and I wrote it down, and the professor gave me a good grade on the test just because he liked that melody. But he couldn't give me a passing grade on the course because I hadn't come to a single class or done a single assignment. So, no, I don't know the rules, but I did find this, that I couldn't make up my own rules. I had to discover what the rules are, because there are certain things that work and certain things that don't work. It's not as if there was some academy of composers who sat down and decided, all right, let's make this rule. And let's tell people they can't use parallel fifths because, it'll make life miserable for them. They're just rules, and you can't avoid them. And so, at first I found it quite difficult. I found it inconvenient. I found it a misfortune not to know the rules. Later I began to discover it was a great good fortune. At first I would find a chord because I'd hear it in my mind, and I would have to think of other chords that would go in sequence with that chord, and in the process I'd lose the first chord. And finding it again, I tell you, it was an agonizing thing. But bit by bit, I found that it was a very wonderful thing. I did have to learn quite a bit, yes. But I discovered also that it kept me from using convenient ways out. In every field, there are certain shortcuts that you learn, the rules. And so many times people who have known music will have said, well, here's what you can do. And many times David Miller, in writing different arrangements for some of my things, I said, no, that's not the right chord. He said, well, what chord is it? I don't know. Come, let me play it on the keyboard. And I would give it to him. He said, oh, yeah, geez, something or other, God knows what. And he understood what I was doing. I didn't, but I did know what I was hearing. And I did know it sounded right, and it did sound right. He liked it too. But it hadn't come to him because he was used to the facile solutions. So not knowing is often helpful, but nonetheless you've got to come back to what works. These are the laws of life. And in all the laws of life, whether moral, spiritual, all of them, we must understand how we fit in the universe. And much of human difficulty comes from not knowing where we fit, how we fit. Now, we've come through centuries in which the sciences have been gradually coming into the ascendant. Why? For the simple reason that they found things that actually work. You don't cure people by donning an odd mask and doing mumbo-jumbo and dancing in circles. There are certain things that the body needs. I think in time people are going to look back on modern medicine and think that that too was a little bit of witch doctoring. There's a lot to learn there too. For instance, Dr. Lewis told us that there was an astringent for the gums. He was a surgeon, a dentist. When he was doing dental work, surgery even, he said that there was this astringent which was made from natural products which worked. And during the war, they couldn't get the natural products, but they discovered a chemical substitute that was chemically exactly the same thing. But he said it didn't work. And I suspect that a lot of drugs today, which are chemically exactly the same as the natural product they're trying to imitate, aren't the same thing. You know that there is an interesting thing that Paolo and Laura Tosetto told me in Italy, that oscillococcinum is a particular thing that you use for flu and influenza and so on. It's a homeopathic remedy. And they, when they were here, bought it here. They said that the American one doesn't work. The Italian one does work. And why? Chemically it's exactly the same. Homeopathically even it should be exactly the same. But one works and the other doesn't. I don't know. I've not made a great study of it. But I have been amazed at how effective it is. And normally homeopathy doesn't work on me, but it did work. Now, I think that we have a lot to learn in medicine also. And that the really natural product, there Manfredi said that if you can find herbs or eat foods grown within a 50-mile radius of where you were born, that food will have a better vibration. It'll vibrate better with you. It'll be more healing to you. I'm a bit stuck. I was born in Romania, but it's worth looking into anyway. There's so many laws of life. The Jagadguru Shankaracharya Puri told me, this is another experiment I don't plan to conduct, but he said that in the tail of a cobra there is an anti-venom. And if you can just bite into the tail of the cobra, if by any chance you happen to come across a cobra, don't let it get away from you. Try it. Let me know if you're still around. But what I'm getting at basically is that there are a lot of laws of nature, a lot of laws of life that still remain to be discovered, and that this world is full of absolutely wonderful mysteries. But science has only explored the surface of it because it's gone at life in a way that is, first of all, entirely mental. Secondly, their preface, their basic assumption, I've nothing against it, is perfectly valid. They said, you can't tell, I'm exaggerating, this isn't exactly what they said, but you can't really know how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Now, basically, I think they said, what they really were saying is, we don't even know if there are angels to dance on heads of pins. They didn't know, and they said, how can we know with what equipment we have whether there is whether there really is a higher world, whether there is God, whether we do have a soul. These things we can't know, but we can know certain things. What can we know? Basically, mass, weight, and motion. Well, that seemed like a pretty pedestrian point of departure in their investigation into natural causes. But it's amazing what they've found just with that as their premise. From that, they've been able to discover a world that's no mystic could have imagined. A universe in which this body is just as vast as the star systems. That there's, relatively speaking, as much space in this body as there is in outer space. It takes the light from the nearest star 4 years to reach us, traveling at 186 miles a second. Just think how much space there is between these two. And we are just that spacey. And not only that, but the solid matter in our bodies is really just vibrations of energy. We're not solid at all. None of these things could have been imagined. If you'd said this to somebody back in the days of the medieval scholastics, they'd have locked you up for a crazy man. But it's so that this world is altogether different, and science has brought us a wonderful view of life that we couldn't have had back in the days when people were convinced that the world is the center of everything, and everything was man-centered and ego-centered, and it was just of such a limited sectarian view of reality. We don't believe in those things anymore, except just a few people. But science, nonetheless, with that approach, didn't take into account these things which are still very basic. Consciousness. And all the things that go with consciousness, like joy and love and peace and fulfillment, and all these things, they were just considered unscientific and left out of the reckoning. In a book of mine, which I just finished last fall, called Hope for a Better World, that's the 4th edition that I wrote in 1 year. But that's the one I want you to read. To me, it's an exciting book. But my chapter on Darwin shows how there's no reason to dispute whether or not Darwin was right. It's fine. Let it be right. But he didn't take into account, why do you want to survive? Why is there an instinct for survival? He didn't take consciousness into account. And so the dogma today, even today, is that consciousness is really just sort of like a secretion of the brain. I mean, you press the brain and out oozes consciousness. It's a sort of image you get out of this idea. But they really think that the brain produces consciousness, and they still imagine the day when somehow they'll be able to create a robot or a computer so intelligent it'll be able to sort of take over things. And back in the 20s, there was all sorts of fiction about the robots taking over the world with a greater intelligence, greater ability, and so on. But the thing is that they lack consciousness, and they can't have consciousness unless, okay, here's how it could happen. Because, this body is also just an aggregate of atoms, but they attract entities. You aren't the body. You're something that has come into the body. You are the consciousness that came into it. Now what consciousness is all about is what science is just totally, having decided that these are questions we can't answer, they've gone on quite naturally to the conclusion that they're not even questions that are worth discussing. Well, of course they're worth discussing. But Descartes, when he said that I think, therefore I am, that's not true at all. When you're without thought is when you're the most conscious. Look at it. You look at a beautiful sunset. Who is enjoying it more? The person who's looking at the sunset wrapped in that beauty? Or somebody who thinks, wow, that looks like a scrambled egg. Let's see, I wonder if I had a scrambled egg and I put curry in it and a little cayenne and make it more that color, that would be pretty good. Or an artist who looked at it and said, oh, I bet I could paint something like that. Let's see. all referring it back to ego and thinking, and you can't enjoy when you're doing that. I remember when a friend of mine and I went up on Mount Waterman in Southern California, and it was one of those magical moments in life when the sun was setting in the west and it was sort of gold in the west, and the moon, the full moon, was rising in the east, and there was a little mist in the valley, and it created this sort of ice blue. And so we had that contrast between the two. It was just absolutely magical. And I remember this friend said, if only I could feel it. Feeling is what we need. And this is the aspect of consciousness that is not included in science. Now, business is another necessary and very important human function. Without being able to succeed in business, without being able to provide ourselves with the things that we want in life and the things that make life convenient for us, it isn't it isn't as easy living. People like convenience, and it's not wrong to like it. Even the animals do. You don't see the animals crashing through the underbrush if they can possibly help it. You know how they built the roads here in Nevada County? They had a cow walk. And wherever the cow walked, they figured that's the natural trail. It always chose the easiest way, so that's where they put their roads. Pretty good system. But business gives us certain things, but it doesn't touch on consciousness again. You look at what field does. Religion, yes, if you can only get it away from the churches. Get it out of the hands of those organizations. Get it out of the dogmatists and the bigots and the people who say that truth is this, when you know that it's something in your heart. But art, the arts, they are one of the most important aspects of life. I'll go so far as to say that apart from religion, they are the most important. Why? Because feeling is the essence of consciousness. You know, when Yogananda started, or wanted to start, his school in Ranchi, he went to the Maharaja of Kashim Bazar and wanted to ask him to fund this school, which he did. But before he would, Master explained what he wanted to do. He wanted to teach an all-round education, physical, mental, all aspects, plus spiritual. The Maharaja decided, well, he'd like to test this young man. After all, Master was, 24, anyway, quite young. Wanted to test his spiritual knowledge. So he called in a bunch of pundits, scriptural scholars, theologians, and decided to have them test him. Master entered the room and he saw these pundits there. He said, I saw them all ranged as if for a theological bullfight. And I knew that they wanted to grill me on my scriptural knowledge. Well, I'm not a scholar. I couldn't quote chapter and verse on anything, except the first few stanzas of Patanjali, maybe. Now we come to the subject of yoga. That's a deep statement, but it doesn't sound it. That now is based on a previous knowledge. The whole Shankya philosophy. You have to know what and why before you understand how. And that's what yoga is about. So that now actually is a loaded word. Anyway, that's off the subject. Master's beginning in this confrontation was to challenge them. Before they could get in, he challenged them. And he said, we've all read in the scriptures. He said, let's limit our discussion to what we've experienced of truth, not just what we've read about it. He said, we've all read in the scriptures that there are 4 stages of consciousness. Mon, buddhi, ahankar, chitta. Mon means mind. Buddhi means intellect. Ahankar means ego. Chitta means, most people don't know, and I'll get into that in a moment. He said, they also say in the scriptures that each of these has its own center in the body. Now, Master knew that there was nothing in the scriptures to tell you what that center was. So he said, would you tell me where each one is centered? Well, they were completely at sea. They didn't have any idea. So he said, well, mind is centered here. Buddhi, intellect, is centered here. Ego is centered here. Chitta is centered here. And there was no further discussion, and so Master got the funding and the help for the school. If you think of it, though, this is not just dogma. This is something you can relate to your own actual experience. That if you are thinking deeply, you often will knit your eyebrows, won't you? Your mind comes here. Because men emphasize intellect more, you see that their foreheads are more straight. You see sort of this Neanderthal ridge here, which I certainly have. If I was skiing, I'd like this. This aspect of mind, of intellect, is here. And so when you're concentrated on anything, thinking deeply, this is where your mind comes. Now, when you aren't thinking yet, in that moment of seeing or perceiving something before estimating what it is, judging what it is, you aren't quite in the intellect yet. You're sort of withdrawn. You see something. Well, Sri Yukteswar used a very good illustration in speaking of this. He said that the mind is like a mirror, and it perceives, for example, the image of a horse, but it doesn't know what the horse is. Then the intellect comes in and says, oh, that's a horse. The mind watching and not yet deciding what it is withdraws a little bit from there. It's more in the center of the brain, of which the center is up here at the top of the head. And you notice that people who are egotistical, their energy is at the medulla the medulla oblongata at the base of the brain. And that is why when people are proud people, for example, it's a understood gesture or position of pride in all countries, having the head back. You see that it happens automatically. That's why the universal gesture of humility is a relaxation of the tension there and a bowing forward. Sort of releasing your your sense of ego. That's why when people are flattered, it's from here. You look at popular singers, they're so proud of their singing, and they throw their heads around. It's all based back here. And you just notice it in yourself. Any time that you feel you've sort of let something go to your head, let's say, notice yourself. It's back here that you begin to feel a focus. Now, it's not a question of, well, I'm Christian, so I have my feelings of ego here, not here. No, you're a human being. And as a human being, this is what happens. Now, the other aspect of consciousness is chitta. Chitta is translated badly by almost everybody. Most people will describe it as things like the lower aspects of consciousness. But that's not it at all. What's his name? Vivekananda described as mind stuff. It isn't that. It's that aspect of mind, and an extremely important aspect. In fact, I would call it the center of everything, feeling. Feeling is in the heart. Women will go more by feeling. That's why their breasts are here. They don't have udders, they have breasts, because their feeling is in the chest and in the heart area. And anybody who feels a deep emotion, you'll find his hand will automatically go to his heart. Master said when he wrote his poem, Samadhi, I cognized the center of this empyrean as a point of intuitive perception in my heart. The real center of your understanding is your heart. Your ego is here, but your real self is here. That's why Ramana Maharshi spoke of the heart and being centered in the heart. It's the same truth. It's not a separate thing. It's not as if followers of Ramana Maharshi have their egos here. No. He said when you talk of yourself, you say here. Well, it's true, because this is your feeling center. Now, the feeling part of our existence is essential to everything that we are. You don't even exist, or I should say you don't even want to exist, except that you want to exist, and that wanting comes from here. Everything begins with feeling, and feeling is the aspect of life that people have done their very best to eliminate. First of all, in the name of scientific objectivity. Secondly, or perhaps even first, I don't know, it was certainly Machiavelli didn't have any heart in his philosophy. It was all power. How to get power over other people, ruthlessly, through torture, through murder, doesn't matter. But the duty of a ruler is to remain in power. Well, thank God he didn't win. But those who tried to follow his philosophy, all of them came crashing in the end. It worked for a while. Hitler kept a copy of Machiavelli's Il Principe, the Prince, by his bedside. Napoleon, they found a copy of that same book in French, I presume, in his carriage at Waterloo, after his defeat at Waterloo. Mussolini said that it was a very, very important book, the sort of basis of everything he'd done. Later, he had it removed from all the public libraries. Why? Well, because he suddenly realized people would get on to what he was really doing, because he was really doing it. And the thing is, yes, it worked for a while, but it didn't work for long. Well, look where every one of them ended. People who follow that philosophy have always finally fallen. Cooperation, kindness, they don't seem to work that well. They seem impractical, but they do work in the end. That's what Ananda's been built on. We have been built on working with people, not against them. Working cooperatively, not with power. I've always felt that a leader, if he's a real leader, can't possibly lead, because he has to take into account what other people want. He's really a prisoner of what they want, and he may be able to present in such a way that they want it, but until then you can't force people unless you want to do it at gunpoint. Look at that. The philosophy of Marxism. How have they been able to make that one stick? By killing off a few people, in fact 100 million people, of their own people. Unbelievable. Just so that the few remainers, as said in Ninochka, in the movie Ninochka, Ninochka comes from Russia as an envoy and talks about the latest purge. And she says there will be fewer but better Russians. Well, that doesn't work. As soon as people can get away from that kind of thing, they will. People talk Marxist-inspired, almost always, against America. Where do they vote when they can vote with their feet? They come here. And if they can't do it legally, they do it illegally. We've got incredible numbers of millions of illegal immigrants in this country. Well, it just happens, you can't help it. But the thing is that power is not the answer. Scientific investigation without feeling is not the answer. Everything comes back to the need for feeling, and the arts can do it. Unfortunately, we're really in sort of a transitional period right now. It's, if you understand the philosophy that Yogananda brought, we're really in a transitional age. And in that transition from one age to another, there's always confusion. It's just the same thing happening now. Right now you see enormous confusion in morality, in spirituality, in what is right and what is wrong. All these things are a part of the present scene. But In the arts, you find absolute confusion. The arts are always a reflection of where people are at right now in their consciousness. If you look at the arts in the 20th century and even from before, you find that there's utter lack of meaning. There isn't any feeling. It really began, I would say, probably not only with science, but with the Industrial Revolution, when people began to discover that they can make a lot of money quickly by mass producing things. Bit by bit, the artists began to sort of get pushed aside. And it began to seem as if the people who would really decide everything would be the scientists, the businessmen, the people who were thing-oriented but weren't interested in feeling. And so what happened in the world of the arts? You know, back in the 18th century still, artists needed patrons. Artists didn't get that sense of ego, of the specialness of an artist. Come the 19th century, and you found people beginning to come to the fore in the field of arts because they believed that the artist is a very special creature. This ego began creating a great imbalance in the world of art, and you found that it's interesting how many artists, certainly by no means more than all, but I do think it's more than in the 18th century or earlier centuries, how many artists lost their mental balance. Schumann, for example, wrote beautiful music, but you can see in the later music that he was getting crazy. Hugo Wolf wrote absolutely lovely songs. I remember singing one or two of them when I was studying voice. But he went mad. Nietzsche certainly went crazy. Many of them went crazy. Why? Okay, I'm going to give you another very interesting point. Because everything that we do in the world of art, in the world of business, in the world of science, and everything that we do in politics, everything is an expression of who we are. It all comes back to man. If man is confused, what he does will be confused. If man is enlightened, what he does will be enlightened. When man is unenlightened, he produces bombs. When he is enlightened, he begins thinking, how can I use science? Like George Washington Carver, a marvelous example of a great man who was a great scientist. But first he was a great man. And in humility he prayed to God. And God said, I'll show you how to bring all these discoveries out of the humble peanut. You know, he was a black man, and as a result he was sort of on the lower level of society at that time. And it put him in a position of not being able to come out and shine the way wasps like us can. What was the result? In his humility, he was able to produce greatness. Humility is the beginning of greatness. When the blacks today go around with a lot of muscle trying to just get even with everybody, they're missing the boat. If they could understand how much by receiving, and George Washington Carver absolutely, he opened the door, he showed the way to do it. Just remember, you don't exist, you're not important. You don't have to show. I remember back when I was a teenager, it was a tough period for me because I'd grown up in Europe, and although I was proud of being an American, when I came here, they all thought of me as a foreigner. I didn't see things in the same way, and I was going to be the head boy in the school in England. Instead, I turned out to be the youngest boy in the lowest class, and I had a great fight with trying to figure out where do I belong. And for a while I began to think, well, I've got to push myself. That's not the answer. It just made me miserable. The answer is get yourself out of the picture. He's the one who does it all. The more we can have that openness, the more we find that we can become great. Greatness comes not from boasting. Greatness comes from openness. Now here is the great fault in modern art. It tries to be something. If it would try to express something, that's what we need. It tries instead to be something. Now, back to this thing that I wanted to talk about. Feeling is really the beginning of who you are in your consciousness. Your intellect, it analyzes, your mind sees, but the feeling decides, I see that horse, I said, oh, I like that horse. The intellect says it is a horse. The ego says it's my horse, which limits it. But the feeling says, oh, how beautiful that horse is, how graceful that horse is. I love that color. The ego is that which can produce the greatness in life. It's that which produces great works. It's that which produces great mystics. It's that which produces even great science. Einstein said that the essence of scientific discovery is a sense of mystical awe. It's true in every field. You'll see that the great men and women in every field, they're basically humble. If they aren't, they're on the skids already. Because yes, you can become proud once you see that you're getting somewhere and people like it. It's a great trap. But if you can stay away from that, and if you can realize that it isn't who you are and it isn't you doing it, it's that thing which is there to be expressed, then you find that there's no limit to that great power of creativity. This has been the cause of the great difficulty and confusion in art specifically, because when feelings are confused, everything is confused. Man is confused not just because his arts are confused, but they're a symptom of his confusion. They're a symptom of how people like Jean-Paul Sartre in the early part of this century used to say that it doesn't matter what you do as long as you really believe in it. He wrote a book called Saint Genet, who was a book about a male prostitute who stole and was in other ways completely immoral, but he completely believed in what he was doing. So, according to Sartre, he was a saint. Well, I don't think he ended up inspiring anybody. And every saint I've ever met really inspired. I'll never forget even meeting Ernest Wood. Ernest Wood was a teacher, a writer. He was the head of the Asian Academy in San Francisco at a time, the American Academy of Asian Studies, I think. And I had to meet him for reasons I'm not going to go into right now. But to me, he was just a person. I didn't know anything about him. Later, I was driving down the highway, down the freeway, and I remembered his face, and I remembered his eyes. And all of a sudden, thinking of those eyes, I felt a real joy. And I knew that there was something in him that was more than just a college president. We find that when we meet people like that, they make our day. They change us. They're the ones who really, the others are just sort of keeping the thing going. But the people of real impact in this world are those people who have attained some measure of real ability to inspire, who have gotten some inspiration in themselves, and that inspiration begins with feeling. Now here's a very interesting point which I was coming to, and that is that we have these four aspects of mind, and when they can work in a natural flow, then you find that you've got the greatest things that man can do, and above all, you have a master. Master said that an enlightened person, a master, doesn't have his ego here. He doesn't do everything from this center at the medulla oblongata. He does it from the point between the eyebrows, the Christ center. It's a good point to think about. The more you can think that everything you're doing comes from here, that doesn't happen without meditation. You've got to direct your mind there. But the more you can act in that consciousness, the more you find that everything you do sort of works differently and more harmoniously. I remember one time, many years ago, I mentioned to somebody that I felt a great power of will here, because this is also the seat of willpower. And she said, but don't let it make you ruthless. And I realized, yes, it could. There's got to be a balance between the heart and the intellect and the willpower. The two have to work together. If you're only here, you can win by ruthlessness, but it's no good. She herself later went that way, and it's too bad for her. So where you should begin really is the heart. This is where your life should begin. Everything you do should begin with feeling. But you see, there are two kinds of feelings. And we find the wrong kind expressed usually in art because it's the easier one to access, emotion. How you feel about things emotionally, this is the great trap women fall into. They fall into emotion instead of intuition. Feeling is the secret of wisdom, but when it goes toward emotion, likes and dislikes, getting all excited or hating this and so on. One time some woman was saying to Yogananda about how well she doesn't have any ego. So Master, knowing that she did, worked the conversation around to another author, and she began panning that author. He said, "Oh, you said you had no sense of ego?" Well, she had to recognize it then. But when the emotions get into it, you divide the camp into winners and losers. There's the right ones and the wrong ones, the desirables and the undesirables. This emotionalism is what you find expressed usually in the arts. It's two things then. First of all, the energy, when you have artistic and creative energy, the energy comes upward. And when it comes upward, and if it's blocked in the ego, if there's too much ego, if you begin thinking of yourself as, I'm the artist, I'm more sensitive than other people, I can understand these things, other people can't. When you have that thought of ego, even a little bit of it, and there's a lot of energy coming up, and people who are creative are always very energetic people. You never find really great geniuses sort of painting like this. They're all very dynamic. There was this one woman artist, a very good artist in France. She was so energetic that when she was to give birth to a child, she was painting up to the moment when they dragged her away to the hospital. She just had that much energy. She just sort of, to her, this was an incident. Well, maybe that was unbalanced, but she did have energy. Now, that energy, when it goes upward, and it will go upward if it's creative, if it gets blocked in the ego, in the medulla, then you find all sorts of imbalances occur. And that's why you see that so often they say that there's a fine line between madness and genius. That's that fine line. It needn't be, but if that genius takes you into ego, it becomes unbalanced. And you see that a lot of very creative people are totally unbalanced because their energy has been blocked in the center of ego. If you can release that energy, if whenever you feel a gathering of energy at the point here at the medulla, if you can deliberately relax it and let it go forward, you'll see that bit by bit it becomes an exaltation, and there's no sense of ego in it, and your creativity will be different. So there are two blocks here. One is the ego, the other is the emotions. The emotions are at the beginning. Even animals have some sort of emotion. They like this and they don't like that. If you can get your emotions to flow in one direction, that takes usually it takes, I'd say it would pretty essential that it be a human consciousness. I can't really think of a lower kind of consciousness than human having any real creativity. We see that they can do little things, but it's always sort of piddling and not very essential. It reminds me of a painting that Picasso did, which he didn't really do. He let his pet monkey do. Then he had it hung up as one of his. And everybody was saying, oh, how wonderful. Oh, this great new work of art. Then he told everybody the secret, that it had been his pet monkey that had done it. Of course, that was rather a blow to the so-called critics. But I've been at art exhibitions and museums, and I look at a thing and it makes absolutely no sense, and I see other people looking at it like this, and they start looking. And somebody around there will begin to perhaps react. Now, if that person says, oh, it's beautiful, I mean, what are you going to do? You don't want to look like an absolute dodo, so you say, yes, it's beautiful. Before you know it, everybody's saying, oh, it's wonderful. And so suddenly you've got a fad going on. Frankly, I think that's a lot of Picasso's great popularity. What if you look at his paintings, here you've got a divided face with an eye up here and another eye down here and all this distortion. What does it show but a certain degree of imbalance? The guy had enough energy to carry it off, but he was pretty egotistical. I read a book recently about somebody, one of the soldiers, who very much had wanted to meet him because he himself was an artist. After meeting him, he didn't know that he quite liked the guy. Well, there's imbalance when the emotions are in confusion. There's more imbalance when the ego comes into the picture. If we can excuse me. If we can get that flow to come upward, it's absolutely thrilling what can come. Don't allow your likes and dislikes to get into it. Don't allow yourself to think, oh, I'm special, I have greater sensitivity. Some people do. I've been amazed at how people are able to see, to hear, to sense things, and they have real talents this way. There's no denying it. God gives us these abilities. But if we start saying, oh, I'm special, we're on the downward road. And before you know it, pretty soon, there's something going wrong, and people of that sort usually end their lives not happy, not successful, producing confusion, not greatness. The arts in this age, and we're still in it, but we're beginning to come out of it maybe, have been dedicated to confusion. There's been this thought that the more incomprehensible I can be, the more people will think me wise. Now you'll notice one thing, when there is no direction to the heart's feelings, there's no melody. You notice that if a composer really has some kind of feeling, some kind of aspiration, he can produce beautiful melodies. Popular music, I mean, it's not all that hard to feel romantic love. Everybody's felt it in one way or another. And so the melodies that come out of that emotion can be beautiful. You listen to things like night and day, you are the one. It's just thrillingly beautiful. And you don't have to turn it to a woman or a man. Turn it to God, and it becomes so inspiring. But you listen to the popular music of today. I was in the Santa Cecilia in Rome to a concert there, and they had some, it may have been Menotti, anyway, piece of music by some modern composer. Honestly, if I'd had a tin can, I could have joined the orchestra. I could have had my whole kitchen outfit there and done all kinds of things. In fact, Alan happened to phone me on my cell phone just in the middle of this thing. I should have turned it off. I'd forgotten to. The ring of the cell phone, I was terribly embarrassed. I just said, call me later. But it didn't make any difference. People just thought, oh, well, it's a part of the whole scene. I don't know how much classical music, so-called, because they're trying to be meaningful and don't have anything to say. I don't know how much of them it begins with melody. You know, when I was in college, there was one of my fellow students wanted to be a writer, and his ambition was to produce the great American novel. Now, if you go out, I remember somebody wrote to SRF, and his desire was to become a master. And somebody said, anybody who has that ambition is never going to be a master. You don't try to become a master. You try to do the right things, and that may be the result. But you love God. You love truth. You try to be true to yourself. You don't try to become something. But when you try to write the great American novel, for example, well, I asked him a simple question. I said, well, what are you planning to write about? What do you mean? Well, I mean, do you want to write about beauty? Beauty! Don't talk to me about beauty. I assumed that to him reality and realism meant lying in the gutter on Saturday night and watching drunks staggering by, and that's reality. I say that reality is when you can be on a mountaintop and see the whole scene, see things in proportion to one another. To get into the midst of the squabble and the noise and the confusion, that's not reality, it's not realism. You have to see things with a certain amount of detachment, and you can't be detached if your emotions are all involved. So in the classical music, the melodies are the first thing to go when you don't really have a sense of where you're going. When you do have a sense, same thing in the visual arts, you see that they begin to have cleaner colors. If they have muddy colors, you can still see if that's what they're really trying to say, and that's the next thing that you need to do in the arts. You need to say, is it worth saying? Not necessarily. You know that I've often used this illustration of that song that was popular back in the 20s or 30s. It was called Gloomy Sunday. Those words at the end are, and end it all. A lot of people listening to that song on the radio committed suicide. Music can have an insidious effect upon the mind when the consciousness behind it is insidious. So it's important that you say the right things. And you have to express who you are, but it's very important to understand that who you are, basically the arts should be a means of self-improvement. If they make you gloomy, why the heck put all that gloom onto other people? If they make you feel unhappy, why make other people unhappy too? I think the artist, like a priest, has a sacred calling. He owes it to himself, and he owes it to that calling to try to offer people something that will uplift. Music is not just a lot of patterns. Music is not just a lot of disordered noise. A lot of classical music even doesn't really say anything that's uplifting. There was a violinist who came to Nevada City many years ago, and the person who organized this thing was saying to me afterwards, she is a genius. He came from Europe. So he had that accent. But because of coming from Europe, there was also this sort of thing. And I thought, what kind of genius was it? She was extremely skillful. Is that greatness? Is that genius? No, it's not. You can become a good typist. That's skill also. To be able to play skillfully and to be able to write skillfully. And let's face it, a lot of classical music is really written to show people that they could do it, but not because this is how they felt. Think of that first sonata of Mozart, the piano sonata. La 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 la. Absolutely beautiful. But he couldn't stick with it. And Mozart's the truest composer I know. He really didn't, as a rule, show off. But still, he had to make that thing so. He had to bring in all the variations and in bringing in the variations, he got away from that feeling. Now, in my opinion, a variation should keep the feeling. It should begin with the feeling and then say it in different ways, but always have that singing, that feeling at the center of it. And that's what in their variations they almost got away from invariably. Listen to Benny Goodman playing the clarinet and taking a basic melody, which is beautiful, and getting so far away from it you have no idea what that melody is. That's jazz. And why? Because jazz is entirely intellectual. It isn't based on feeling, it's based on mental, analytical thing. It's very clever, it's like a good chess game. But it doesn't take you anywhere. It doesn't take your feeling anywhere, and it's feeling that takes you somewhere. You don't know where you're going with it. It's just, wow, that's pretty interesting. And it's good. It's really good for what it is. But what is it? If you bring art back to what it really should be, it has to come back to human values. It depends always on who you are. Now, some great painter may have done an absolutely wonderful painting of an absinthe drinker who's absolutely in the last stages of disintegration, sort of bent over a table, looking cross-eyed, but absolutely beautifully executed. I might, out of ego and pride and my wealth and so on, spend maybe $20 million buying that thing, displaying it in my living room, and being extremely happy and telling all my friends to come and see this wonderful painting of this absinthe drinker, if that's what you do with absinthe, I'm not quite sure. I can see a little boy, like that same boy who exposed the emperor when he wasn't wearing any clothes, in the story of Hans Christian Andersen. I can see him coming into the house and saying, "What's that? I don't want that person around me." Ask yourself that question the next time you see a work of art. Is it, if it's a person, somebody I would like to know? I'll bet you $100 that most of it, no, I won't. I never bet. Anyway, if in almost all cases, it isn't somebody you'd really want to know, is it? Sometimes, yes, but to me that's the primary criterion, not the skill. But does it make me feel good? Do I like the guy? It's not just, sure, I'm not much of an artist. I have 4 of my paintings that I've done out there, which shows that I've tried. But I've only done it under duress because I couldn't get somebody else to do what I was trying to get done. But no, I couldn't do a painting of a Patrick over here and make it look like Patrick. But the point is that if I could, many people could do a very good portrait of Patrick. Some could emphasize that he needs to lose a little weight, excuse me. Some could emphasize different aspects. But the point is that if you have a joyful consciousness, it would come across. You could do a picture of anybody, and you're a handsome man, and I didn't mean you, but you could do a picture of somebody who wasn't at all handsome, and yet it would give you joy. If the artist had joy, it's not just the subject, it's the creator. You can look at the world and see beauty everywhere. The tones that you use in colors, the shapes, the way you do the lines around a painting, the nuances of feeling and the subtleness of tone. If you want to express subtlety, you won't have strong outlines. You'll sort of soften the outlines. If you want to be very bold, you'll make strong outlines. If your consciousness is pure, you won't use impure colors. You won't be attracted to them. You just won't feel to. And you'll notice that there are times in your life when you feel drawn to different colors because your consciousness perhaps is reflecting those colors. You've heard about auras around people. They're realities. Kirlian photography is a very interesting thing. I don't know much about it. I don't know how exact it is. But for example, Ram had his picture taken with Kirlian photography. And he's a very energetic man, and there was this brilliant red aura around him that really said, Ram, colors say things much more even than form. In nature, in music, in sound, in shapes, in everything, there is consciousness. God brought the universe out of his consciousness, and everything expresses that consciousness. If you can see God there, you can see beauty in everything. So don't project your ego. If you want to do good art, if you want to enjoy good art, look for these things. Art should express joy. Why? I know when I was studying guitar, it was an interesting story, by the way. I was new at learning the guitar, but I wanted to sing my songs, and so I picked up a book called, it was Pete Seeger's Folk Singer's Guitar Guide, and I was working on that, and talk about chutzpah. I'd been working at it less than a month when somebody asked me if I would like to give a concert. And, that's pretty stupid, but I said yes. The reason I said yes was that I knew it would force me to practice. And I knew I could always carry it by telling good stories and singing without quite getting the chords right and so on. So I knew I could carry it off. I could sing Indian bhajans and so on. But anyway, I said yes. Well, during this time when I was writing this music, I asked somebody if she knew of somebody who could teach guitar. And she said, well, the one you need is somebody called Larry Hanks, and he's a very good guitarist and very sensitive teacher, and he'd be just right for you. Well, I was very glad to hear this, and I didn't know where to find him. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, I happened to be with a group that was singing Christmas music over in Berkeley one evening in the Christmas season. I looked at the man, I said, oh, that's Larry Hanks. I went over to him and I said, what's your name? He said, Larry Hanks. I said, I'm supposed to study the guitar with you. So he became my guitar teacher for a while. Well, he was into the kind of singing that's real, man. And he complained that my music was too happy. He said, life's not like that. Life is real, and well, to paraphrase, was it Wordsworth, life is real and earnest, and its goal is the grave. I thought, well, gosh, I should please this poor man, so let me try to write a song that's more in line with his kind of thinking. So I tried to write a blues, but it was a total failure, so I had to call it the non-blues. And I don't know if we'll get to sing it for you this weekend, but it's one of my most popular songs. But the point is that, yeah, you can feel blue about life if you want to look at the ground all the time, and you can see life in any color you want to. But there is something in all of us that makes us want joy. Now, first of all, we think that what we want is pleasure, but pleasure is only, you might say, imitation joy. It's not the real thing. Happiness is what we think we want. Happiness is still the imitation. It's not the real thing. It's counterfeit joy. There is something inside us that makes us want that which will give us joy. And you'll see that everybody's looking for that in one way or another. Almost everybody's looking in the wrong direction. That's why they keep being confused and going in their confusion toward those very things that will make them miserable. More money, more sex, more power, more drink, more everything of the senses. And so you see them at the end of life miserable. I remember getting on a bus in San Francisco many years ago, and there were a couple of young girls there, about 17, older teenagers, and they were laughing happily, and they were radiant, and it was a pleasure to see them. And I could see all the people in the bus looking at them enviously. And I thought, well, I'd like to see them in 10 years. People start out in life full of exuberance, enthusiasm. After a few years, they become dull. Their eyes become dull. They become bitter, disillusioned, unhappy. You don't see many people by the time they're 40. They say that the first 40 years you have the face God gave you. After that, you have the face you made. And it's so, to this extent, that people create their own fortune. And if they live right, they'll find themselves with what they want. Everybody wants happiness. They just don't know how to find it. And they end up like this Larry Hanks, who's a good man, but still, they end up thinking that life is dark. That's not goodness. We all want bliss, finally. And art should express that, and that's what we're here this weekend to emphasize. I don't have an awful lot of time. In fact, as it happens, about 5 minutes. But I want to stress that point, that art should express joy. And it can do it. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be nice smiling faces. It can be serious faces. But there will be something of the artist's consciousness, which is the real power behind a work of art. I'll never forget going to see the Mona Lisa in Paris. Now, we've all seen countless reproductions of the Mona Lisa. You can see it's a great work of art. It's wonderful. But I tell you, when you see it in person, there's a vibration there that you can't find on any reproduction. Don't ask me how. I don't know what it is. But there's something in that canvas. A work of art is it's a living work. And the more you can put that life in, the more you can share it with others. Music. That's altogether different, listening to a live music from listening to it on a CD. It's lovely on a CD. I'm eager for you to buy our CDs. It's not the same thing as hearing it in person. Nobody can tell you why. I'm moderately deaf. I can't hear tones that most of you can hear perfectly easily. But I can tell when there's a tone that's not right. I'm not talking of pitch or anything like that. There's some vibration in the sound, even of a singer's voice or of an instrument or of an orchestra, that I don't hear, that other people might hear. I can tell that it's more living. Some aspect of the ability to hear isn't just oral. That vibration you can't capture it on CDs. You can't capture it on tape. You can't capture it mechanically. And in fact, a live thing is the real thing. That's why you can't just have a scripture and think that's all. You can talk with the scripture, it won't answer back. You've got to have somebody who can give you these things. That's why in India they say you need a live guru. You need somebody who can give it to you. Or, because our guru is not living, he is living, but he's also living in his disciples. And his power comes through them to the extent that they are in tune, try to be in tune with him, and that will be true for you and for those who come to you. And so a great teaching can carry through the ages, but don't ever think that it's in a book. Don't ever think that because it's said this way, how it's said is so different from just the written thing. That's why I've urged people to read not just to read my book, A Place Called Ananda, but listen to the tape, because it's so different. It's alive that way. Now, in all the arts, in music, in painting, in sculpture, in singing, and singing is the most musical of all the instruments, because all other instruments are really only projections of the voice. They're projections of what you feel inside, and nothing can express what you feel as instantly as your voice. A little touch of ego, you hear it in the voice. A little touch of joy, you hear it in the voice. Listening to Master's voice, I remember going upstairs one time so that I didn't see him. He was dictating. Just hearing his voice, it was so thrilling. He wasn't a singer. He sang very well, but he wasn't a singer. But I'd rather listen to that voice than I would to Caruso, because it had a spiritual vibration. Your consciousness, your vibration, this is what we need to learn to bring back into life. And the greatest thing that can do that, apart from spiritual teaching and the things that we emphasize in our work here, is the arts. And to me, it's a great and important part of what Master brought to the world. And thank God he was an artist also. You know, when he designed the domes, as you'll see in Encinitas and at the Hollywood Church, I used to look at them and I thought, well, they're nice, but they didn't seem special. Then I saw his original drawings, and they were wonderful. How were they wonderful? I don't know. But there was something different in the way he drew them from the way the builders were able to imitate it. You know, the Ananda logo, when I did that, it says, joy is within you. And the way that line comes, I'm not much into abstract painting, but I discovered for myself here that the particular way, I had to do it about 75 times before I could get that line to express joy. Any other particular angle or whatever, that's not the word, but any other configuration of that, it didn't look like joy. How could that particular one look like joy? I don't know, but it did. Somebody, twice in fact, people in Italy have seen that and they said, oh, there's real power in that. There is power in a line if it's right, but you can't get it if you don't have the feeling. You can't get it if you think, all right, I'm going to do joy. Doesn't work. Joy goes up. Oh, all right. In music also, you can't get it for the rules. It has to come inside, and when it does, all of a sudden, there it is. I've used in my book, Art is a Hidden Message. It's an important book to me. But I've used this. What was I talking about?
You used an illustration in Art is a Hidden Message.
Yeah, what was it? Can you think? I can't think of it. Yes.
Oh, probably publications building?
No, that wasn't it either. Oh, I'm sorry. But anyway, that's only an illustration of the point that I'm trying to make, that the way that a line goes is very important, and an artist who doesn't get that, who just thinks this is what I want to do. Yeah, this was the illustration. I wrote the piano version accompaniment for Hello There Brother Bluebell. And you know, hello there brother Bluebell, play me a tune today. The breezes on the meadow have made you look so gay. The meadowlarks are singing, joy's in the air. Come set your bells a-ringing, you've gladness to share. And it's a children's song inspired by St. Francis. But at the end, the piano did, the singing ended and the piano did da-da, da-da. Now, my musical memory, my habit, born of whatever other kinds of music that I'd heard that did that, would have done the same thing. Da-da, da-da, da-da. A very simple thing, but what would it say? Time to go to sleep. It would take the mind down into the subconscious. So I realized that and I said, no, it should be different. Da-da, da-da, da-da. And it lifted the thing. A little note change can be a huge difference. When in the music that I've written, I can't claim anything for it except that I just love it. Somebody asked me once, what's your favorite music? My own. If they'd said, what is the greatest music, I wouldn't have said that. But it resonates with who I am and what I feel, and that's why I felt that. But I have to say that every single note I've ever written has been completely sincere. I've done it for a reason. I couldn't have given you a reason, but I felt it. This is the way it had to be, and it couldn't be any other way. That's why with our farewell song, the go with joy, love, may joyful blessings speed you safely on your way. May God's light expand within you, may we be one in that light someday. And everybody, because it's a natural musical habit that we've grown up with, everybody has tended to sing, may we be one. Wrong. It should be, and this is why I say, it should be, you have to be sincere about every note. If you say, may we be one, you're sliding up to something and giving that peak less importance. May we be one, and then you jump up to that one and you've given it more power. A small thing, but you multiply a lot of these small things in music and you see that a note can be very important for setting a mood, for changing the... People must think I've been very petty or picky in saying no, it should be may we be one instead of may we be one, which sounds like a nursery rhyme. It isn't that. I don't get all upset about it. I don't break my pen and start stamping on the ground. Nothing's that important. I don't think of anything that I've done as important. But if it's to be done, we might as well do it right. And this is right and that's not right if you're trying to say something. And what are we saying? May we be one in that light. That one is an important word. Therefore, you want to give it the importance of that note. And that note, therefore, should be framed. It should stand alone. It shouldn't be something you sort of climb up to. It's unique. It's special. Every note, the way you speak, the way... it's so interesting. Oh, Gad, it's after 12. I'll talk tomorrow. I could go on and on and love it too. But we'll try to get into it more tomorrow. Thank you all.